I'm stopping for two reasons. Number one, even outside it's a bit loud. It's not the loudest of tools, but it is fairly loud, so I'm going to put my earmuffs on. Secondly, what was the other reason I'm stopping? What was it? There was a reason. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's the only reason. Oh no, I was just telling you that I've, as you can see, I've brought a table outside and clamped the neck to the table because, it's fine sawdust that comes off this thing, and it makes a bit of a mess, so this way I don't have to worry about containing it and tidying it up. Alright, you can see all over my jeans, or maybe you can't, but I can. What I mean by it's quite messy. It's probably about as much as I've ever taken off in one go with the angle grinder with the flap disc. I think I'm getting more confident at doing that. And wow, it's decent progress. I'll take to it by hand now. One of the flaws that I noticed in my very early necks, and I especially noticed it on the first neck that was going to go on this guitar, this Fenderish guitar, is that the thickness isn't going to be consistent, but the line along the back of the neck wasn't straight. So it would get slightly thinner there, and then there'd be a bit of a bulge there. As you know, that was one of the first necks that I made. But one thing that I really focus on now is getting a nice straight line from the volute at the base of the headstock to the volute, the pointy raised bit just before the neck goes into the body. Right, so that's after using the saw rasp and the random orbital sander after the flap disc, and nothing by hand yet. And that was pretty quick too, so I'll go back into the garage now, move all this back in, and do the rest of the sanding by hand. Did you know that if you decide to go into building guitars, you're going to do lots of sanding. Lots of sanding. So for all the old screw holes that are no longer applicable, I've taken some bamboo skewers. That one doesn't have a sharp end. In fact, none of them do, because the sharp ends have been stuck into those holes with a blob of glue, then snipped off and tapped in with a hammer. I'll leave that to dry. I won't play with that until tomorrow, and then I'll snip off what remains sticking out and give it a sand and then a re-oil, just to make it as nice as I can. Well, it's finally arrived. The 20mm plug cutter. I've cut out a few samples. It's brand new, so it cuts nice and cleanly. And, well, this isn't clean. I've put it in and put in plenty of epoxy that will cure overnight, and tomorrow I shall come back and file and sand that all nice and tidy. It'll be unrecognizable. Well, no it won't, but it will look much nicer. Okay, I filed that down just as I filed all the others down, and then gave it the sanding treatment, and I've oiled it. I may go back and do some fine sanding on areas that I'm not completely happy with, but there we are. That's worked well. I'll re-oil it as well. Obviously, if I go back and sand it, I'll have to oil it for that reason too, but I'll touch it up with oil a couple of times just to make sure it gets a decent coat like the rest of the body. Okay, let's drill those holes properly now. I've done some small pilot holes and attach the neck. I'm putting the final touches on this neck, so I've just drilled the holes over at the drill press for the tuning machines, and now I need to put a nut in. Now, it's a flat headstock as opposed to a back-angled one, and so there are two general approaches to fretboards. There's, just to be simple about it, the Gibson approach, which has a bound fretboard and a back-angled neck, and because it's a back-angled neck, the nut sits right at the end of the fretboard, so after the binding has finished, because of course the binding ends at the fretboard, and then you've got the nut. And then you have Fender style fretboards, which have the flat headstock, and so the fretboard goes all the way to the headstock and the nut sits in the fretboard before it ends, and Fender style necks typically don't have binding. So this is sort of half of each. It's got the flat style headstock and the nut that sits in the fretboard before the fretboard has ended, but it also has binding, which means that I'm having to cut the nut slot into the binding as I cut it into the fretboard, which, really is no trouble. It's just different. It's something I have to do. So let's be careful about it. We're nearly there. Now I just need to attach it to the guitar, put some strings on, put on a couple of string retainers, and we're done. Just about there. The final thing. I suppose I'm putting that in the dark there, aren't I? There. That is, of course, the... What do you even call that? It's the thing you put the strap on, but it's not a strap lock because it doesn't lock. I don't know. But on it goes. And that wraps it up. And in the end, this guitar is everything that I wanted it to be, except for the scars left by the old neck screws, because I changed the way that the neck will attach to the body if I was in the corporate world, I'd say, what are the learnings I could take away from this? I would just make it into a noun. But okay, so what do I learn from this? As someone who hasn't actually completed the guitar, well, I have actually, but not one like this. Not with the. No, I have done a bolt-on neck, but you haven't seen. Okay, whatever. I'm still relatively new in this game. What have I learned? Well, I've learned that I'm going to bolt on necks that way in the future, unless I want to do something like a vintage reproduction where I have to use the old style screws. That's fine. And I've really learned, well, I was going to say I learned the importance of making sure the neck is the right width. Had I built this neck now, as I did, but you know, the original neck that was on here, had I built it now, it would have been the right width. It was just an old neck from back when I didn't really know what I was doing. Certainly I've learned to focus on details like bridge placement, and I'm happy to report that, well, it's aligned nicely. One trick I did learn is to allow for a bit of wiggle room where the pickups are sitting. You can't do this with every type of guitar, but when the pickups are mounted in the scratch plate, you can route the cavities large enough so that there's a little bit of wiggle room in where the pickups are positioned, so that after you've got the bridge on and the strings on, you can make sure that the poles of the pickups are perfectly lined up with the strings as they are here, and then you can put the holes into the body and screw the plate on, which is what I've done here. So look, I've got a few guitars in the works that I need to return to now, and I guess just expect more and better from Monster Guitars.